David is the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics Emeritus and Counselor to the President of Oberlin College in Ohio, United States. David is the author of 8 books, including Down to the Wire, Confronting Climate Collapse, and co-author of 3 others. His book, Dangerous Years, Climate Change, The Long Emergency and the Way Forward, will be published this summer. He actually missed the meal last night because he's working on that. He's the founder and chairman of the board of the Oberlin Project and has headed the effort to design, fund and build the Adam Joseph Lewis Centre. Please give me a huge welcome for Professor David Orr.
It's pretty nice to be here, and sorry to miss dinner last night. Ian said he would give me a dinner in a little brown bag for takeaway. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning my time, so if I fall asleep, you'll just go ahead and whatever you're doing. What I'd like to do is 3 things. From the book, The Way Forward, or Dangerous Years, I want to talk a little bit about climate change. It is the definitive issue of our day, and it is symptomatic of lots of other things. So I don't want to deal with climate change as a thing. I want to deal with it as a symptom. The second thing is, what do we do about this? And I think there are good reasons why the change that we need will begin at the bottom. And with many of you and all of us together in higher education, it's really a crisis of mind and how we think about the human role in the natural world and how we think about changing that to be sustainable, fair, decent, and just. And then the last thing, I do want to reflect a little bit about education. What does this mean? The root of the word means to induce, to draw forward or draw forth. And we still treat education as if the heads of students are empty little piggy banks, and we put coins in them at the end of the day. You draw out a degree and so forth. It can't be like that. Education has to change dramatically. And there are so many signs I've seen in the last several years of change in the way you're doing education here in the UK and really around the world. I think education is standing up. Let me begin with this. This is not good news. This is a graphic that I first saw last week from the Washington Post. This is temperature of the Earth. And there are lots of different ways to portray this. You may have seen the NASA YouTube video that shows the same roughly time period of a century or more. And you can see the warming around the planet. But that is not good news. And the COP21 goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade warming as an outer limit or guardrail, we're not likely to hit that. It would take a lot of miracles and changes to keep it at 1.5 degrees centigrade or less. 2 degrees centigrade was thought to be a safe boundary a few years ago. It's now known that changes are happening much more rapidly and much more extensively than previously thought. So that's simply a graphic that puts what you know and what I know before us. This is the bad news. What we have done is not solvable in the way we typically use the word solve. So we've dug a very deep hole. We put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and what David Archer, who's a climate physicist, is saying here, and what is in the IPCC reports, all 5 of them, is that the change will last for hundreds to thousands of years. So once carbon is in the atmosphere, it stays there for a long time. And so that means we have to begin to think very differently about the longevity of this crisis. And that changes education, that changes governance, that changes lots of things. So this isn't a quick crisis. And this is pretty bad news for people in the United States because we're used to solving technical problems, technological issues. Broken carburetor on a pickup truck, that's solvable. Putting a man on the moon, that's a solvable problem. But carbon isn't solvable in the same way, certainly not in the same time span. Now that doesn't mean there are things we can't solve it in some way, but it means the solutions we have to begin to think about are over centuries and perhaps millennia. This is Dubai. This graphic is taken from Nature Climate Change, and it shows something that increasingly we're seeing. Temperatures, Mike said yesterday, hit 125 or give or take degrees Fahrenheit. Last night there was a report saying the temperatures in fact may have been over 130 yesterday in parts of India. Parts of the world are becoming uninhabitable. That's not at 400 parts per million. that is at the forcing effect of about 370 or 375 parts per million, because there's a lag effect between what comes out of our tailpipes and smokestacks and the climate change-driven weather effects that we see. This is the Persian Gulf, and what the darker colors here, the legend is down here in the bottom, say is that temperatures in parts of the Persian Gulf could hit 150 degrees Fahrenheit, 60, give or take, C. And so by mid-century or later, and so much of this changes rapidly. The obsolescence of scientific knowledge about climate change is very quick. So we find it, and mostly it's on the bad side, is we find out, oh my God, things are worse than we thought. So as science works, and science works rather slowly in these things, this area becomes uninhabitable. So Dubai and the Persian Gulf region and parts of the Middle East simply become uninhabitable. To bring it home, we know probably for certain that much of the political turmoil in Syria was caused by warming that drove farmers off their land and the long-term drought and so forth, and people moved to cities and political unrest began. So there is the layering now of political and economic and social trends given climate change. So migration and emigration and so forth, this is not how it's going to be. This is simply how it is at the start of this process. So this is taken off the web storm you had here in the UK in December. This is the result of pine bark beetle in the Rocky Mountain region of the US, Mexico, Canada. About 90 million acres so far, and it will effectively wipe out most of the pine forests of that region. How do we think about this? And the book Danger Shears, I'm trying to argue in that book that this is really, remember quadratic equations that you solved in math classes? I never solved them, but I was told they could be solved. But you had to solve each of the components to get the right answer on the right-hand side of the equals mark. And so you had to solve individual problems to get to the right answer. Sustainability is like a quadratic equation in that sense. And so I listed what I think is a reasonable order for these things. I started with Pope Francis' issue of heart. If you haven't read the Laudato Si', read it. It's a magnificent document, partly because it was written by the head of the Catholic Church, but also because of the thinking and detail that he put into it. It's a blend of science and morality and ethics and so forth. We have to change matters of heart. And that's not a technical issue, it's how we feel. And I think that's already happened to everybody in this room. You're here because of a change in perception and heart. The second thing is education, how we think then. Based on a change in how we feel, what do we think about? And how do we think about certain things that are complex and difficult to think about? Then I put governance third. We've gotten into difficulty in large part because governing structures don't work adequately in a world of complex problems. Governments are too big to solve some, too small to solve others. And so we have to rethink what governance is all about. I put economy fourth. Typically people put economy first or technology first. I put economy and technology as the last two items on the list. They reflect other kinds of things. But we have to build an economy. Yesterday, as Mike was talking, I was thinking that to get to an economy that works, we have to have prices that tell the truth about what we buy and what we do in the world. So pricing carbon is critically important. Pricing ecological destruction is critically important. Pricing the destruction or impairment of human dignity is critically important. Pricing damages that will fall out onto future generations. We now cast a long shadow on future generations. That ought to be calculated. The last thing I put here is technology. This is not an argument against technology, but we tend to think of technology as kind of the magic bullet. We'll have better technology and so forth, and it is necessary to change the technology, for sure. But that doesn't get us home. That is the last thing on this list for a reason, for lots of reasons. So technology reflects how we think, how we feel, and the kind of problems that we want to solve. In the States, what I see on television, I've never seen an advertisement for high-speed rail or for light rail transportation systems, never. Because the economic system wants to sell us individualized containment vehicles powered by, electricity is great, and Elon Musk is great, and so forth, I'm all for it. But that leaves us isolated and still building highways and sprawl and so forth. We we've got to think now how we move collectively at the lowest possible emission of carbons. And if we don't have to move at all, if we get better at design, so we build access into the system. So I can walk or bike to where I need to be to work and schools and shopping and so forth, best of all. So climate change fits a definition. I don't want to go into this, but the phrase wicked problems fits climate change. It is devilishly difficult. And sustainability broadly, even more so, is a devilishly difficult problem. It is complicated. It is a quadratic kind of equation. And in some ways, we think about problems again, but there's some aspects of this that are dilemmas. Avoidable with foresight, but not solvable. So once having created nuclear weapons, now we face the ongoing dilemma of what we do with that knowledge. You can't get it back in the bottle. And so sustainability, just think of it as a wicked problem. We can talk about this in Q&A if you like. Now here comes all the happy stuff. My favorite cartoon, The American Scientist, then a miracle occurs. So what's a miracle look like? And I think we see miracles around us all the time. And the trick is recognizing them. Now I want to start at the bottom. And the bottom here, in my career, I did a PhD work in political science, so I began to think about all these big global things and international relations. And I've worked with the current President of the United States on climate change. We put a group together called the President's Climate Initiative in 2008. We met with all the candidates for the presidency and that year, met with Obama, stayed with it, but our idea was you start at the top and begin to change things at the top. Well, that isn't working very well. I don't know if you follow U.S. politics. We're being trumped now. And, we can talk about that in Q&A. Actually, I don't want to talk about it at all. But making America great again is an issue. Which America do you make great? What's the year you picked? Was it 1840 you wanted to go back to? Anyway, never mind. But we need to begin to rethink from the bottom up. I think this is going to be rebuilding, and the great thing about universities is we are at the bottom. We live in communities, and so you start changing at the community scale. Then you begin to link. So that's what I want to talk about. This is my town, Oberlin, Ohio. Several years ago, I once said, kind of as a wise comment, stupidly wise, that this picture was taken by a first-year student at Oberlin College, my college. We strapped him to a helium-filled balloon and gave him a camera with electronic download and took great pictures, phenomenal, great photographer. And he didn't transfer from Oberlin, he just kind of drifted away. Bob was an awfully nice kid. We miss him a lot. One came up afterwards and said, you shouldn't do that to your students. He thought I was perfectly serious. But so this was taken literally by a drone. So we're a city, began in 1832, which is very recent in your history. This is old to us. We're from America. This is new stuff to you, old to us. 1832, the college was formed by a group of people who were do-gooders, and the college accepted African Americans and women. The first college in the United States to accept and graduate African Americans and women. That's part of our DNA. So that's kind of what we do in the world. Very famous for Conservatory of Music, the Environmental Studies program that I've chaired for years and so forth. So it's a great little college. Turns out more kids are going for PhDs than any other small liberal arts college in the United States year after year after year. So that sounds like an advertisement. The advertisement's over. We're also middle of the Rust Belt. You'll see a map in just a moment. Detroit is, actually the map should come up here. Detroit is about 84 miles to the northwest. Detroit was a city once of 2.2 million people. Now it's down to about 600,000. It was sized, if you took Boston, Manhattan, San Francisco, and 15 Oberlins, you could drop it into the area covered by Detroit, 140 square miles. Rust Belt. Toledo to the west of us, Youngstown to the east of us. That was the heart of the U.S. economy 50 years ago. That was our version of Silicon Valley. That made cars and steel and all kind of industrial products. So that's where we are. Now, the story is this. In the early 1990s, I went to Oberlin in 1990, 26 years ago, chaired the Environmental Studies program. We had no place to be. And so we needed an office, we needed a center for environmental studies, and I was told by the administration, I'm sure this doesn't happen here, but if you want to build a building, you can do it, but you can go to no donor otherwise ever likely to give to Oberlin College. So that left me the Columbia Drug Cartel. And until they told me, no, they're ours too. So we'll take it from anybody. So anyway, we set this in motion. And so what we did on this project was to say, if you want to be part of building a building, come on in. And so we had 13 public design charrettes, and the charrettes are just big planning meetings with lots of paper on the walls and lots of confusion, people around offering ideas. So the question for the students was, what kind of building do you want to build? And so this was pictures taken at the first several design charrettes, and what they wanted to build is over here on the right-hand side. They wanted a building, for one thing, powered by sunshine. And I said, do you know where you live? You're in Ohio. The sun doesn't shine here. I mean, sunshine is a theory in Ohio. We've seen pictures of it, but it's a theory. So we have about as many sunny days as the city of Seattle. They said 100% solar. And then as the discussion went on in these 13 meetings, every Saturday afternoon for the whole semester, we met and we talked about the building, and they wanted a building that was drinking water in, drinking water out. Now, there's several ways to do that. One is to put the toilets in another building. We talked about that. One is just to be more disciplined. This was kind of close enough to the Reagan years, and Nancy Reagan once said, just don't do it. So that was one possibility. But it got us to thinking about what buildings were. And all buildings have their own kind of curriculum. Architecture is kind of a crystallized pedagogy. And sometimes rooms and buildings tell no story. But that telling no story is a story itself. You follow what I'm saying? There's a curriculum here. And so where materials came from, where the energy comes from, where did all this start? So it got us thinking upstream from the building, the wells and the mines and the manufacturing establishments where material flows begin. And then downstream from the building, atmosphere, toxicity, and so forth. If we did a sample, I don't know what your sample would be like, but if we did a sample of the students in those 13 charrettes, on average, they would have about 230 organochlorine compounds in their fatty tissues and bloodstream. That's a century of promiscuous chemistry. You think about nature. Nature takes about 4 things to make virtually all of the things that we see. Trees, birds, bugs, and so forth. We take the whole periodic table and we spew it around the Earth. And so you find chemicals virtually everywhere on planet Earth, thousands of miles from where they're used or released. So the students wanted all that taken out. And so the question for the building became, could you build so well, artfully and carefully, that you would cause no ugliness, human or ecological, someplace else or at some later time? Now you take a deep breath when you think like that, because that's like truth and beauty and justice. You can try to get there, but you're never going to all get there. It's still a building. You're going to damage some of the world in this process. And then the students wanted the building to be something that evolved over time. And so instead of a building being done, a snapshot of architecture and technology at a given year when the building is several years before it's actually opened, it evolves over time so that as technology improves, as we learn more about how to manage and build and so forth, that building also improves. And then instead of having a building, it's just a kind of a container where you have classes. The building was to be itself its own curriculum. So you think about the curriculum of architecture, so the way it's designed, the way it's operated, the way it's built, and you'll see more of this in just a moment. So the idea that the building isn't just a place where education happens, it's a building that educates by the way it is designed, by the way it evolves over time, by the way it's maintained. The picture here, John Lyle, I'm blocking some of your seeing this, but John Lyle, right here in the lower left-hand corner, was one of the great minds in ecological design and helped us think through what a curriculum was like. Now, when you look at all those first 4 or 5 slides about climate change, it's real easy to demonize people. But if you have a 0 carbon footprint, please stand up. People in the back went down. Sorry. Thank you for that. Yeah, we all have carbon footprint. And so if I don't see this as a problem of demonizing certain people, but I see this as a design challenge, then I've got a handle on the problem I don't otherwise have. But it's a lot of fun to demonize people. I come from a long line of Presbyterian preachers, and it's in my nature. I love to demonize people and they're evil and so on. But that doesn't get you very far. And what it does is to eliminate the possibility of solving the things that we can't solve here and getting on a path of long-term solutions. I'm using that word deliberately now. So to begin to think about all this as a design issue. Now, part of the difficulty is just how we think. We're visual creatures. About 70% of our sensory apparatus is connected to what we see. So we tend to believe what we see. Now the reverse is also true. I don't want to go there right now, but we tend to privilege what we can see. So think about sustainability as something that's visible. All of a sudden, that becomes the default setting. And as 70% of our sensory apparatus kicks in, and we tend to believe that, that becomes then the normal. So the question was here, could you downsize all of the issues of sustainability, not all of them, but most of them, into a 14,200 square foot building on an 1.25 acre site? And could you make that then a laboratory for applied hope and sustainability and the skills that we all will have to cultivate to get to anything like a sustainable world? So that's what this was all about. That's more or less the building program. That's the final result. Well, not the final result, but it was taken several years ago. The building is entirely solar powered in Ohio, where sunshine again is a theory, but we haven't heard of it. It's got 2 photovoltaic arrays. It processes all its own wastewater. This is a John Todd designed living machine. It looks like a tropical greenhouse. So you flush a toilet, the water goes into a series of 4 tanks, 7 feet. You'll see one picture that's coming up in just a moment, but 4 tanks, 7 feet deep. And in those tanks across the very top are racks that hold plants. So the idea is to maximize the exposure of root surface to water column. And plants do what plants do. They take out nitrogen and phosphorus. If you make it complex enough, they will take out toxics and detoxify toxic elements. They can also be designed to sequester heavy metals. So the idea here is you would know where heavy metals go in the stream. This was installed in 2001. It has worked perfectly for 15 years. We have not had a problem with it. This is the back. What we did in the building was to make this a laboratory for learning horticulture, managing landscapes, again, at a small scale, an understandable scale, a scale that we can get our heads around. I can understand a 14,200 square foot building. It's hard to get our heads around the whole planet in a way that's really meaningful. So this is the back. Students maintain all the landscape. These are cycad trees. That's the atrium. This is a auditorium. All the wood in the building is from certified forests. No clear cutting, no chemical use, and so forth. All of it's certified. The students wanted a building that was transparent to data. Now remember, this is 2000, year 2000 over. So we had a course with the National Renewable Energy Lab and a group of engineers. The question was, what do you want to monitor in the building? Why do you want to monitor it, and how do you do it? And so the question resulted in a demo that resulted later in the formation of a company called Lucid Design, which is now the premier high-performance building monitoring company, started by 3 former students that were in that class in the year 2001. So what we have is a building with about 160 data sensors in it, reporting on everything. Students even claim that they could detect when faculty in their office is flatlined. And they probably can. I've never asked. But this resulted in our monitoring the whole campus. And so energy use around the whole campus, you can actually go to this particular display, or it's descended, and you can punch a building on a touch screen. That building pops up, and you can see energy use at the moment. You can see it over the past week, month, or year, or 5 years. And so wiring up, so the idea here is quick feedback. Now, part of the difficulty with human behavior is we have an action here and a consequence here. So I leave the lights on in my house, but I don't get the bill for another 30 days. And so the response time eliminates the idea of reaction, effective reaction. So this tells us right away what you're using. And then beside this, I don't have it on the screen, we put, or my colleagues put lamps that glow green or red or pink. And so it tells you quickly what energy, when it goes red or pink, it's bad. You're using more than you should use, and so forth. So this is, I didn't know how important the building had become nationally, and certainly in the UK, until this picture, which I got on a ladder and got up. This is the roof of the Adam Joseph Lewis Center. And I got up on the roof and waited until the sun was just right and hit the PV array and took this picture. Didn't realize the impact of the building until I saw this. This is Harvey's beer. And you'll notice they took my picture and put it on their beer label. So my people are talking to their people and trying to something like a case a week of beer. This is the second PV array. This is Sherrod Brown standing on the roof of the Lewis Center with me, and that's a 100 kW array. So the building has 160 kW array minus some degradation. That has been able to meet 120 to 145%, depending on the year and other issues, of the building's energy use. It is a net energy exporter, even in Ohio. Now, I want to say a word about costs. Typically, people say, well, you know, we love what you do, and sustainability is a great thing, but we just can't afford it. And so I want this is just a slight detour in building economics. You can't afford not to. And the deeper the green, the better the economics turn out to be. And that's our experience, and that's what we did a study of about 160 green buildings in the States. The same lesson came through every time. The deeper the green, the better the economics. So if the payback time on a building, let's say, runs out to 10 years to do something, better glazing, better insulation, better shell, and so forth, 10-year payback time is still 7% return on investment. That's still pretty good. And so if you stretch it out to 15 or 20 years, it's still a positive return on investment. The thing that we didn't do, and you may do it here, but the thing that we as an institution did not do very well was all this stuff down here, collateral benefits. All the things that happened because we did a building in a particular way. So student yield, for example, went up because students heard about, from California, heard that we had this ecological design curriculum, and the Lewis Center got all this publicity. It still gets a ton of publicity. So they want to come and be part of that. And so environmental studies for us, the program that I chaired, wasn't just about all the ain't it awful stuff. It's just the world's going down like this or up like that, and there's no hope, no place for me. It was about how we build a different world. And we had a model of it. One little, dinky little building out in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio, 14,200 square feet as a laboratory for sustainability. I want to go back here. Student yield went up, publicity went up. Funding went up. This building was a free gift to the college from a variety of donors, including the Lewis family and others. And then for me as a teacher in education, for the students involved, it gave us a place to work. It reflected what we wanted to do with our lives and careers and research. So all of a sudden I had a compatibility between the world I wanted to build and where I worked, full of daylight and sunshine and bright and lively place, and it works. And so the future doesn't have to be dim and dark like a cave, and we don't have to suffer our way to sustainability. We can build our way there, and I want to stay on that theme a little bit longer. So the question then was, we had done, and we in this case included about 250 students, a design team that included 20 to 25 professionals. It was the A design team in the States in the 90s. And so, but if we stopped there, we would have a cool little building, a nice little Ohio downtown, and it would have been significant, but it wouldn't have amounted to much change. So the question for us was, could we take this up to the scale of a small city? Oberlin, Ohio is about 10,000 people. It's a dinky little town, middle of the Rust Belt, 35 miles from Cleveland, 84 miles from Detroit, about an hour and a half from where Elaine and I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, close to Youngstown, Ohio. So we were heart of the Rust Belt. What did we have to say to the other people living in the Rust Belt? So we began to organize, again, using students and a lot of community people and so forth outside the university, but using the anchor institution of Oberlin College, and we formed something called the Oberlin Project. And the goals are on the board behind me. Could we begin to drive the economy? Again, Rust Belt, we've got a poverty level of 20%, at or below poverty. Could we drive the economy in a different direction, make it sustainable, prosperous, fair, and decent, and do it by being sustainable? Could we engage people in building houses and renewable energy and so forth and local foods and change the economy to do the things that we'll have to do to make a world that is livable? And then, so we became part of the Clinton Climate Initiative. We're actually one of the C40 cities. We're down the list. There's a long list of very big cities like Beijing and London, but we're the little asterisk down there. We're in a good-sized tenement building in Beijing, but we're there. And so, and we're actually one of the few that have reached actually participant status. So we've eliminated about almost 90% of our carbon emissions in the city-owned utility. And it was not nearly as hard as it appeared to be when we started. And this, again, is students, faculty, and townspeople coming together around an effort to make Oberlin something that it would otherwise not be. And we want, one of our goals is to get 70% of our food grown locally within the local area. Local, we mean maybe 15 miles or so. That's a goal we're aspiring to. So this summer we're busy putting together a food hub, which we just opened last week, as a brokering place between the local farm community, and the people that eat in the town, which is everybody in town. But we won't import food from California, which is 2,000 miles away, at a price we could afford, at a volume we need, in another, 5 or 10 or 15 years. California drought has settled in its long term. Climate change is changing virtually everything that we ever thought we knew about farming and agriculture. The U.S. grain belt is going to be shifting northward up into the Canadian Shield, where the soils are much thinner. Grain production will fall dramatically. This is simply all baked into that future, that first slide I showed. And then we want to do this in a way that we did the building. Can we begin to change the city and engage students and faculty and townspeople as change agents in the city? And so changing the city and becoming educational, and taking the word education, making it capital E. It's education, not necessarily in settings like this alone, but also on Main Street, in City Hall, in Rotary clubs, and all the city clubs and NGOs. So I'll skip over that, and I think I said most all of that. So full spectrum sustainability, which is in the title of the talk, and also in your program. I don't know what that means. It's easier to say it than it is to do it. But it means you're going to have lunch with lots of different kind of people. And they speak different languages and different jargons. They come from different ethnic backgrounds. They come from different income and status groups. And so full spectrum sustainability means, can we begin to build bridges across these boundaries that separate us? Now, so we've organized the community around 4 major themes here, but let me stop on this just for a second. We typically, and I don't know if this applies in the UK in the same way it does in the States, but we typically silo problems. And so there's a sustainable agriculture movement, and there's sustainable forestry, and there's a green urbanist movement, and there's a green education movement. All of these are kind of silos. Our goal in this is to put them together as best we're able, so that solving a problem in one helps to solve problems in another. Can we do systems thinking applied to the way we think about the world? And I think, frankly, the word systems, as I understand it, is the most dangerous and radical word in our language. Because ultimately it means we're all together. There is no separation. John Donne said this better: no man is an island, well, no woman's an island, no animal's an island. We're all in this as the fabric of life on the planet. So we have to begin to think at right angles to our specializations. This is just a way to depict our primary goals, and they are all in operation. This is an opportunity for us to take our students and engage them in the process of change. And if you ask what's the syllabus for this, boy, it's hard to put together a syllabus that really works. Because they're in the messy business of having to reckon with the way people work in the community. Any questions on this slide? This is interesting. Don't bother reading it right now. I'll explain what this is from Donella Meadows, who was one of the great U.S. thinkers about systems, and she was one of the co-authors of the Limits to Growth book that came out in 1972. And before she died a few years ago, or about a decade ago, she wrote a little book called Systems, Thinking in Systems. And what she does in this article that's in the book is take the way organizations change. All of our lives, we're going to be in one organization or another, whether it's the Defense Department or General Motors or Unilever or Marks and Spencer or a university or college. We're in organizations. And the question is, where do you intervene to change those organizations? The other night over dinner, there was a great talk about how you change systems. And the one thing you don't want to do is antagonize people. You want to work positively with them. And one of the messages that came through with all the speakers the other night was find a way, and Mike said this yesterday, find a way to be part of the solution for people that work above you in the chain of command. And that's pretty good advice. But what Donella Meadows is asking here is, how do you change systems? Where do you intervene in the system? So what she does is take these in inverse order. These are the things we typically argue about. Policies, taxes, who gets what, when, and how. That slows the damage sometimes. If you really want to change the system, you get down here where you look at the goals of the system, mindset, worldviews, and paradigms. That changes the consciousness of the systems. Now, this is not scriptural. This is suggestible. Change the culture, change the issues, the points of intervention, and the strategies of system change will also change. You get what I'm saying? So in the case of the U.S., you can change a law up here. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 changed worldviews down here to some degree, not nearly enough. We're seeing that now in the States. But so you can argue about this, but we distributed this article to about 250 people in a community organization, just a cross-section of the town and our Oberlin Project board. And the question for them was, where do we intervene in this system called Oberlin, Ohio, the city, and also the college, to begin to affect positive change? How do we do this? And so this is not scriptural, it's suggestive, but beginning to get people to think strategically about how they exert all their idealism on the system. And how do you change the system? And that it isn't easy. And sometimes you have to have radical people, sometimes you have to have just people who know how to get along, but in any case you need thoughtful strategies to change it. Now, change, how are we doing time-wise?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? All right. This is going to go on a blur. There are 87 slides that are going to come along. This is the, talking about change now. This is the, in our town, this is our town square, 13 acres. This is the block we're calling the Green Arts District. Both of these are owned by the college. We are the anchor institution. It means we're going to be there for a long period of time. So that's the anchor institution. On this block, this is one of the great art museums in higher education, the Allen Art Museum. It's ranked right behind Harvard, Yale, and Williams College. We're number 4 for art museums. This building we redid at the U.S. Green Building Council gold standard, which is really hard to do on an old, that's a 1917 building. This building is Performing Arts Center. It's scheduled to get $30 million upmake. This is the worst hotel in Western civilization. I worked with the president of the college, who is a lawyer, and I said to a crowd about the side, he was sitting right in front of me, and I said, this hotel, as it now stands, is a plausible excuse for limited nuclear war. Right after the talk was over, he jumped up and said, David, don't say it ever again. He's thinking lawsuit and so forth. But and the way things worked out, now this goes back to the other night, we were talking about opportunism the other night. Here's how the Oberlin Inn, the worst hotel in Western civilization, built in 1955, the design and aesthetic and comfort standards of American motor inns. The Board of Trustees at the college was to meet there in the fall of, I forgot the year now, 2008 or 9, whatever the year it was. And several days before they convened in the Oberlin Inn, bed bugs arrived. There was an infestation of bed bugs all up and down the East Coast. Somebody brought bed bugs in. And bed bugs are devilishly difficult to get. They get in the pipe chaseways, they go through a building and so forth. You have to basically use nuclear weapons to get rid of them. And so I was on an airplane going from Cleveland to San Francisco with 2 board members who claimed to have been bitten collectively between themselves about 50 or 60 times. They were not sure. But they sat for the 18-hour flight from Cleveland to San Francisco. That's a joke. They sat there and they scratched. So at the next board meeting, it came up that, gee, we need a new hotel opportunity. And this was dinner that night. This was one of the points suggested. I said, oh, hey, we can live together. So the idea that this would be a driver in the local economy. This became then the linchpin for the Oberlin Project. This is what we did. This is the hotel that opened last week. It's a $38 million project. My involvement was to raise money that would balance the budget, but it turned out because of the numbers, this worked out actually pretty well. So it is a U.S. Green Building Council platinum rated, entirely solar powered hotel. The solar system you'll see in just a moment, it's an off-site solar system, but this was the driver. This is the driver in the downtown economy in this little town of 10,000. It is a buyer, it is an attractor, it's a buyer of foods and wood and art and so forth. It's an attractor for people. It begins to bring money into the town that otherwise would never come. So the way our story evolved, now this is not an argument that hotels don't solve everybody else's problems, but it did solve one for us. We needed something that drives this little economy with a poverty level of 20% at or below poverty. This is a story across the street. 3 of my former students, just as they graduated, and the way we graduate kids in the States is they're poor as church mice. they graduate with a lien on future income, averaging around $20,000 to $30,000 per student. Now, I don't know if that's true in the UK, but in the States, that is part of our difficulty. Bernie Sanders wants to wipe that out and have kids graduate. And I think that's another subject we can maybe talk about later. But these are 3 kids who graduated and decided to stay. So right across the street, the hotel's on the right-hand side of this picture, down this street. They put in a $17 million gold-rated 3 buildings, condominiums downtown with the commercial space on the first floor. This is the New York Times story about them. They've now gone on to start a development company in Cleveland. They're ready to finish their 3rd project this year, taking old buildings in downtown Cleveland, turning them into incredibly nice housing. So you don't have to be 55 before you make a difference. They did this in their 20s, and they did not have money. These were kids who were poor with a lien on future income and so forth. But they put together a sustainable development company in their 20s, and they've now done major projects that attract attention all over the States and maybe all over the world. This is groundbreaking we want to see if we could take the ideas of sustainable design down a level income-wise. Could you do the German Passivhaus standard at an affordable price? Remember, 20%, at or below poverty. So this is the groundbreaking for that. This is a home bought by a woman, a single mother, 2 children, below the poverty line. We helped a wee bit with financing, but she could finance it on her own. She never has an electric bill. Walls are just a bit below the German Passivhaus standard, R40 walls, R60 ceiling, R20 below the slab. 5 kW PV array on the roof. She will not have an energy bill. So she got an income supplement in this because most of poor people, a big fraction of people below the poverty line, income goes to energy costs. The goal now is to replicate that 50 times through the city and build a housing company that does this as part of the Oberlin Project. This is the 11-acre solar array we did 4 years ago. Part of this is dedicated to the hotel. So this is the energy supply for the hotel. There's no line that goes from this. It's just electrons go into the line. We deduct that part from the allocation of the whole array. But we're getting ready to do another. This is rated at 2.27 megawatts. If you're a number person, our base load is about 11 megawatts. We peak at about 22 in the summer. So this shaves off a big fraction of that summertime peak at a cost we could afford. Now, if we had done that array, which we did 4 years ago, if we had done it this summer or even last summer, the cost would have been half of what we paid 4 years ago. So if you look for little signs of hope, on one side you have these remorseless working of big numbers. On the other side you've got incredible technological potential. So if you ask, could you power the U.S. and the world or U.K. by renewable energy and efficiency? I think the answer is yes. By one recent study in the U.S., we waste about 80% of the energy that we use. And that's based on simply off-the-shelf technology. So the combination of radically improved energy efficiency with existing technology and renewable power, we could do it. The thing that's lacking in the U.S. to this point has been the political will to do it. This is a meeting we held. We want to do the next 2 to 3 megawatts as a part of distributed solar energy system. So this group, students, faculty, townspeople came together. We started a solar cooperative. We thought we might have 6 or 8 people there. This meeting was standing room only. And so in this little town, we found there were Tea Party members, there were guys who came in, pickup trucks with battle fatigues on. We had the full political spectrum there, but what united it was they all wanted to be part of the solar revolution, and for varying reasons. Some do-gooders wanted to do it because it's saving the planet. Others just wanted to be able to cut themselves off from utility, and so it goes. This is what we've done so far. We've collectively spent about $106 million, with another roughly 70 or 80 in the pipeline. Most of this is investment money. So what this did for us was to get us in the sustainability movement in our little town, thinking about how you use money to drive the sustainability process. So if it's all about government, then we're talking about regulation and saying you can or cannot do certain things. If it's about money, then you begin talking about opportunities. How do you begin to use the money that we already have to move the world in a different direction? Very quickly, can we take this model at Oberlin up to a regional scale? So this is the Rust Belt. Flint, Michigan, you've read about the water supplies up here. Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Youngstown over here. This is what we're calling the Lake Erie Crescent. And the goal we have here is to begin to take, I'm blocking your seeing this, I think. begin to take this and get anchor institutions, colleges, universities, zoos, libraries, sports teams, health care facilities that are by anchor, I mean they're going to be there. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be there in that place. Can we get anchor institutions to buy differently and focus on three things? One is going to be local foods, because food is going to be a critical factor in a carbon-constrained world. And so rebuilding local farm economies, buying local and minimizing all the local long-distance transport, and that's part of the resilient world model we have to build. The second is energy. Can we take renewable energy and apply it to buildings in the same way we've done here, and also begin to develop companies that do all the things necessary to build a solar economy, make solar collectors, inverters, electronics, and controls, all the things that go into that kind of economy. Can we make it locally and keep the money within the local or regional economy? And the third is simply infrastructure. Everything we build, there's roughly $1 billion of infrastructure being built in this region in any given year. Can we take that money and begin to put that to green use and change the way we build and change how we build? So that's the idea. And this is an old idea. If you know the literature on urban development in the United States, the name Jane Jacobs would come up very quickly. And Jane Jacobs described this as simply import substitution. Her point was that national economies don't grow. There's no such thing as a UK economy. There's the Bristol economy, there's the London economy, but we grow as city regions. And the idea of city regions is to grow by import substitution. So if you can make it or do make it or grow it or process it or service it locally, buy it locally. Don't send money outside the region. And that's how Detroit once grew, and then that's how Detroit once fell apart. Because all of a sudden all their money began to go out and buy things elsewhere. So that's the theory. The collateral benefits, we've engaged a conversation with the White House on why this deserves a federal or national floor below it. And the reason lies in this slide, all the collateral benefits we get. Every one of these is a reason not to have as big a federal or central government program as we typically have. You follow what I'm saying? So this appeals to both Republicans and Democrats. I gave a talk on Capitol Hill 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, and I had afterwards, I was talking about this, and I had Republicans and Democrats in the room. They both came up afterwards and wanted to own this. I said, you can't own it. This is not about right or left. This is about backwards or forwards. It isn't conservative or liberal. This is simply doing what we know how to do, beginning to rebuild our economies from, again, the grassroots up, and engaging students, and faculty, and townspeople in the local area. This is great curriculum. All of a sudden, young people who are otherwise depressed and see no hope in the world can be part of the process of building a different world that is sustainable and resilient. Will it happen in their lifetime? Not likely. But it will happen. We'll start the process. So, I want to say one other thing about this, and this may come up in Q&A. This means the change strategy is working with chief financial officers and chief investment officers. They're not the kind of people who typically show up in meetings like this, but they need to be here. And so, or at least in the States, that's true. And part of the difficulty is in the States that if a financial officer buys local, but the prices for any reason come in higher, then he or she loses the job, their job. The same is true with investment. If the investment doesn't pay out, or say a rolling 3-year or 5-year average, then they lose their job. So there has to be something like a floor, financial floor below them. I can talk about the details of what we're proposing later if you'd like to know, get into that. A few words about education. By and large, we do it badly. And what we've done is to render students, more often than not, technicians, not thinkers. And we can't do that. Sustainability, back to the first couple slides, sustainability is the biggest issue humans have ever faced. It's about the integration of heart and mind and technology and economy and governance and all of these things into a very different path. This is a quadratic equation. And so begin to think about how we educate for that world. And it's a confusing world. It's a world, Ulrich Beck, the sociologist in Germany that actually was in London when he died, wrote a book called Metamorphosis. We are moving toward a world we do not understand. Robotics, climate change, synthetic biology, the internet, all the certainties we once had about how the world existed, how the world was, and how the world is, and how it works, are vanishing. In that world, it means those of us who are assigned a job of teaching have a much tougher job. What do we teach? What was it that we learned that is relevant to you young people in this world we're moving into? We're metamorphizing into a very different kind of world. It isn't change only. It's more than just change. It's a different world. And our terms, our categories, our disciplines don't work very well in that world. So what do? Well, one point is that all of that disorder, I started with the first 4 or 5 slides, reflects a prior disorder in how we think. So it is not just a matter of some interest in education, it is the core of education. It's a crisis of education, not just in education. It's a crisis of how we think about our role in the world. That's why what we do here in settings like this is so critically important. And bringing alliances together, as Ian has done so well here with businesses and progressive businesses and great universities and great faculty and great students, that is an important alliance. And then there's this. Everything that we do, everything that happens under the rubric of education is environmental education. And we will, by excluding things, we'll teach you that you're not part of that or it's not important to environment. But the truth of the matter is everything is related in one way or another to environment and how we live on the planet with a biosphere. And then a couple last thoughts. This is from Karl Heinrich Robert, and you can read the quote, but you have to learn, and we have to all begin to learn how to think in systems. What is linked to what and how? And systems thinking is the core of sustainability thinking. And so you can't separate things out for very long. And so the old Cartesian model where we break things into components and the scientific tendency toward reductionism, that has to change. But we're all imbued with it. We are all Cartesians. That's how we've been taught to think. That is in the mother's milk. That's in the way advertising works. By the way, advertising is another thing. This is a side point. But in the States, the average is that we get exposed to 5,000 advertisements in one form or another per day. The largest effect or largest attempt ever to deflect human consciousness and human intellect, both consciously and subconsciously toward a consumer world. And often the targeting is done at little kids. And so what we do here is basically remedial, trying to overcome that. But that's enough of that. So a couple final points. If we think in terms of systems, then everything that we do has a very different valence to it. That we pay for sustainability, whether we get it or not, and we pay in one currency or not. So you can build sustainably and avoid crime and unemployment and the anomie that afflicts modern societies and so forth. You can go down this list and you can make a very long list. But we pay for it whether we get it or not. And in the States, once I ask students, if I gave you the U.S. defense budget is approaching about $1 trillion. It's roughly half of the world's total expenditure on arms and weapons. So I asked my students to come up with a class project and say, how would you, at what cost, keep America safe? And the highest figure was about $200 billion, so 20% of the current defense costs. But begin to think about defense as a security issue. And the same would apply to UK. We spend in the States about $15 billion every second for something we call defense. But think about that again in that systems perspective. In a systems perspective, could you do it cheaper, better, safer, and all that? And then finally this. There aren't many accidents in the world. Climate change is not an anomaly. It's a symptom of other things that have gone wrong. And so what are those other things? It asks us to get deeper than the latest news about 402 parts per million or 410 or whatever the number is now. But begin to think about that as symptomatic of lots of other things. And then for those of you who are students here, Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk, and Pope Francis singled him out as one of the major influences on his life and through his great writings. And this was his advice to students. You'll be bastards of every shape and form, but avoid at all costs one thing, and that's success. And so when you think about your life, think about it in a very different kind of way. Success in the unsustainable world is rather like being successful on board the Titanic, an overused analogy. But think about being successful in a very different kind of way, bridging this old world we're leaving behind and metamorphizing into a very different kind of world. Can that world be fair, decent, beautiful, safe, and sustainable? And then this is simply, and I'll skip over this slide, but begin to think about your careers. Whatever your career is, whether it's law or business, whatever it might be, think about your careers. What is the work in the world that needs to be done? And what part of that can you as a student do? And for those of you who are faculty administrators, how do we How do we serve as midwives to this human effervescence of creativity and good-heartedness and better thinking? Our role is rather different than it used to be. It's not just transferring information. It's beginning to give birth to a very different kind of human consciousness. And students all over the world. You're part of a magnificent generation that is changing things. And students in the States and Europe and as far as also in China now, raising questions about law, and they're winning. This is the decision at The Hague. This is a decision that came out of court in Seattle giving students the right of standing in court cases involving climate change. Pope Francis changed the debate a good bit. Again, read Laudato Si, it's worth reading. Now, what is sustainability? Two last thoughts. Nobody knows. I mean, it's a big confusing word. We toss it out like confetti at a parade or something like that. And we talk about sustainable this and sustainable that. Nothing yet is sustainable, except unsustainability. So how do we redefine this? And I think it's actually fairly simple. A friend of mine once said, make it clean, green, safe, and it'll be sustainable. So that was a different equation. Make clean, green, safe, and fair, equal mark, it'll be sustainable. I think there's a lot of truth in that. Robert Fulghum, who wrote a book called All I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, put it this way, this is a long list, but this is a short version of it. Play fair. If you're interested in fairness, that's politics. And that's also law. And so what does fairness have to do with the rights of future generations or other species or other people existing in this same planet at the same time with us? So play fair. And we learned that in kindergarten. But now the goal is to extend that to the whole planet and extend the idea of fairness out to other generations. Clean up your messes. I mean, your mama taught you that. Don't leave messes behind you. And for Koch brothers and for ExxonMobil and for lots of companies, that's an important message. And so now we have the wherewithal, I think, to clean up those messes. The science and technology are there. The question again is will to do it. And so when companies like Marks and Spencer, we heard from Mike yesterday, and others get involved in this and say, you got to clean up your mess. If you're in our supply chain, you can't leave a mess behind. We don't want to be part of that process. But think about what that means for a university, a zero discharge university powered by sunshine. That can happen. Third item here, share your cookies. We learned that in kindergarten too. Don't take it all. And so if I take a list of the wealthiest people on the planet, I can put 62 of them easily in this room. 62 people on the planet have more net wealth than the bottom 3.7 billion people. 62 more wealth than the bottom 3.7 billion people. That's in an Oxfam study that came out a year ago. In the U.S., roughly 185 people. The number is 400 of the wealthiest billionaires in the United States have more wealth than the bottom 185 million people. Can't get to sustainability from there. That won't happen. And then don't take things that aren't yours, including resources and future. And so we've got to think about, in the United States, our typical carbon footprint is about 22 tons per year. We've got to get it back down to 2. And so these are tough messages, but this is what sustainability requires of us. And then dangerous times, Fulghum says, hey, hold hands crossing the street. Bond together. Come together. You can't do it alone. We've got to come together and meet as groups, as what Ian is doing here, what all of you are doing, to come together, build strong alliances, build friendship, and so forth. I want to say one other thing about this. When you come together, celebrate. Don't talk about environment. Don't talk about sustainability. Don't forbid anybody from using the word sustainability. A friend of mine sent me a picture in Amsterdam of a beer wagon. A couple of guys had an idea of a beer wagon where powered by people get on the wagon and they pedal bicycle pedals. Some of you seen this? And they have different kind of beers on the wagon. You get on and make a. I'm not advocating drinking beer because I know you don't do it in Britain. But think about this as a celebration. This cannot be simply a long list of to-dos you have to do. It's got to be fun. It's got to be a celebration. So sustainability has to be, in a way, kind of a party. I'll let Einstein have the last word here. But our goal in education is to extend our horizons and see the world very differently than we've seen it in the past. And I think, can we get there? I think we can. It will look like terrible sacrifice to lots of people to consume a little bit less, but we have this terrible paradox that happiness, for example, by most data, peaked in the United States about 1957. For me, it was a different year. But 1957, we were about as happy as we ever got. But the amount of stuff we had kept going up and up and up like that. So then you have to explain that delta between the amount of stuff that we have and how happy we are. And this goes back to this point. The sustainability eventually is about the things that make us happiest. It's our poetry leagues. It's coming together. It's the stuff we do together with each other. It's cooking meals together. It's parties together. It's what we do together. That's sustainability. This is my take-home message. Thank you very much for listening. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be with you. Thank you all.
Thank you. We've got a little bit of time for some questions. So do we have any questions? There's one at the back that we start. So we'll deal with these two on this side. So far into Leanne and then go straight to the back. Anything in the middle? Any questions? Or on the left? Not just yet. Okay, let's go.
Thank you, David. I'm Leanne Denby from Macquarie University in Australia. Brilliant. Loved everything about that. What would you say were or are the biggest challenges that you've dealt with in undertaking the Oberlin Project?
Typically people will say it's the lack of money, but money in Australia or the United States or Britain is usually not the issue. The biggest problem is imagination. It's the ecological imagination to see what could be but isn't but should be. And so seeing our little town as something to be prosperous, fair, decent, powered by sunshine, it was getting people to think differently and see different pictures. And that's why, in those of you who are planning to be architects or maybe have a background in architectural discipline, that's why architecture, I think, for me, is probably one of the most powerful educational forces in the world, because you see a very different world here. And architecture done as a form of pedagogy, I don't like the word pedagogy, it sounds like a foot disease, but if you think about it as instruction, I mean, there's a curriculum in every building. In every landscape, in every collection of buildings. So that helps us spur our imagination. But thanks for the question.
Okay. Hi, Alan Woodall. And
where are you?
Very back corner.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
And thank you very much. That was really inspiring. One point actually, thank you for getting a bigger laugh than I got in any of my comedy stand-up last night. But serious question actually. One thing that inspired by what you were saying, like the systems theory, and it's very kind of it's very stitched up and pulled together. But one of the things from my experience of observing life and our world is it's very messy. So how do you kind of square that very complex circle of the kind of messiness of the world with the fact that what's required here is a really quite a very systemic approach to things?
Another question over here. Hey, the academic mind, I think is, I don't mean to characterize this because I am one. But I think the idea of a course requires us to tidy up and to make it more appear more connected and more understandable than sometimes it really is. And the world is just, William James called a blooming, buzzing confusion. And cause and effect are hard to link up. And I think leaving some of that messiness intact for students is probably helpful. The world is messy, and there are very few issues that are just really clean cut. I mean, in the United States, Donald Trump is cleaning up some of the mess. I mean, he's very. I'm sorry. But I would leave some of the messiness there for students. Ethics is the ethics of climate change, for example. That's a tough subject. And who do we deprive now to help who in the future? And once you get into that and into all the literature, I mean, I'm all for future generations, but it does raise certain perplexities. And I think what it says, what I've said to students, I've got our college has a fairly irate student body, very active. If you read the New Yorker magazine, the current issue, you'll see a bit of that. That teach them to be a little bit less certain of their certainties. Hold knowledge a little more lightly. Hold your causes less firmly. And that's not I'm not advocating being wishy-washy about things. There are lots of things that, for example, causes, I think climate change is a big cause. We've got to be dedicated to it without being so certain and so ideologically rigid. our students, I'm sure this is not true in Britain, but our students tend to use the F word frequently. And so I try to advise the ones that will listen that you can use the F word 3 times in your entire life to good effect. Don't blow your quota at Oberlin before you're 21. So, and I think that the last thing is this. I think what you do is important. If we can't laugh at the human situation now, we aren't taking it seriously enough. There is, the role of humor and celebration is critically important. I think it's important for leadership also. But I'm kind of off the subject. I would let knowledge be what knowledge is. It is messy. It is complicated. And if I take one word, for example, the word progress, what does progress really mean? We've taken it as part of our ideology. It comes in the mother's milk. And so we take the word progress as if somehow we know what that means. What does it mean for us to progress, individually or collectively? And unpack that word and get down into it. There are all kinds of assumptions built into that word progress. We take it for granted. That my next iPhone, it's better than my last iPhone, therefore we're progressing. Is that really true? We've taken the assumption, for example, in society now that communication ought to be cheap, easy, and quick. Is that what we want? Or should it be more difficult, harder, and expensive? And we have, in this land, you have this land the UK produced the world's greatest literature came out of the UK. That was when people wrote by quill pen. The greatest thinking politically in the United States happened with people reading letters over candlelight, taking a quill pen and writing a letter, packing it up after 4 or 5 days, putting it in a pack on a horse or a ship, and it took months. And so much of the things that happened quickly are destructive to us. The only knowledge we've ever been able to depend on was slow knowledge, the kind that you mull over. And so this is why in this debate, I had one of the slides I didn't talk about it, the wicked problems. They do span the sciences and the social sciences and the humanities. And the humanities are important in this. If you want to really understand sustainability and what drives humans, Shakespeare's a pretty good place to start. Homer's not a bad place to start. And so this old human dialogue, and now the dialogue about the future needs to be brought into this. Can I say one more thing here? I'm probably running out of time, and I'm way off on a tangent here. I used to have my students, there's something called the Tale of the Jinn. And the Tale of the Jinn is an old Islamic tale just back in 900 or something like that. And the story is that humans are in the dock, we're being tried. And the question, and animals are in the jury box, and animals have been given voice and sentience. And so the question is, should humans be kicked off the planet or not? And the animals debate this. So I would ask my students to read the Tale of the Jinn, it's short, and then play the role that they are the attorney for humankind. And what case can you make for us? Now, I don't mean to demean my Oberlin students, they're a great bunch, they're really, really smart. But they can be a little gloomy. And so the first response is, there's no case you can make for humans. You know, we deserve to go. And then think about it. And you think, well, pretty soon it's Mozart, and it is Shakespeare, and it is sciences. We're the species that first discovered the age of the universe. And we are the first species to create a case for protecting other species. You start to think about a more complicated role. And the reason why I think this is important in all this knowledge and so forth is that if we better understood why we should be sustained, we would know better how to go about it. But we're not so sure. And the last 200 years has shaken our confidence as a species. Once thought we were made in the image of God and angels and so forth, and now we find out we're just animals and competitive and so forth. But we can rise above it. We're not just animals. And so I think a good bit of the crisis of sustainability in all of its forms comes down to who do we think we really are as a species? And so this is why I think the humanities is important, Laudato Si is important, but the literature on us as a species, what are we? And what do we want to be when we grow up? We're still a young species. We've grown into 7.4 billion of us. We said we'll peak at about 11 billion. What do we want to be when we grow up? And that's where I think the big ideas come in, not the technical ideas. And that's why it's important for students not to be just merely technicians. Sustainability has all kinds of technical aspects to it for sure. but they are technical aspects of big issues: freedom, decency, taking care of each other, security, safety, prosperity, and progress defined somehow. You follow what I'm saying? This cannot be a small conversation. It's got to be a big conversation. And that's what makes it so exciting and so forth. Anyway, thanks for asking the question. I went off on a complete tangent. I didn't take my Ritalin this morning, and so completely, I'm just thank you all.
Please join me in thanking